Hello, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thanks for watching another video on our leaders. Today we will be covering Mette Fredriksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, and Duque Marquez, the President of Colombia. So, as mentioned with this video series, I'll be going through pretty much all the major leaders of the world today, this date being 2020. It's actually interesting as not only as the videos progress, like anything, I believe the comparisons within and the quality of the videos are improving. However, also as we progress throughout these videos, I'm aware of most of these leaders already. However, I'm starting to draw more parallels between videos as well. So I think another interesting comparison here would be Mette Fredriksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark. I think there's actually quite a few comparisons, not only between her and Duque, the Prime Minister of Poland, but also the political landscape in these two countries as well are also shifting in a sort of parallel fashion. So that's also something I would like to note. So without further ado, we will start with Mette Fredriksen. As usual, for the rule of thumb, the one who goes first is the country with a slightly higher GDP. So in this case, Denmark's GDP is slightly larger than that of Colombia's. So without further ado, we shall begin with Mette Fredriksen. So Mette Fredriksen is a Danish politician. She is the 27th Prime Minister of Denmark, and she has been in this position since June of 2019. She's also the youngest Prime Minister in Danish history. She's the second female Prime Minister in Denmark history. However, she's also the youngest Prime Minister in Danish history. So that's quite a feat of its own. She's quite young, born in 1977. She's the leader of the Social Democrats, Democrat Party, and she has served in this position since 2015. And she was also the second woman to hold the leader of this party as well. So a lot of firsts in her on her resume, we can call it, and I think this has very much to do with the fact that she's actually quite differentiated from past politicians in the past political landscape within Denmark. And so with respect to her early life, she was born on November 19th, 1977. That makes her born in November. A Scorpio, for anyone who's interested. My brother's a Scorpio. She was born in Aalborg, which is the third largest city in Denmark. However, there's quite a big drop-off. Copenhagen is rather large. However, the second largest city is Aarhus. Aarhus has is about almost 3 times the size of Aalborg, so quite a big drop-off. The city she was born in. The city Aalborg she was born in has a population of only about 139,016 people. So really quite small. But Denmark isn't a large country to begin with, so it still obviously wasn't too difficult for her to rise out of this smaller area. Historically, the town of Aalborg, perhaps where her ancestors likely at least immigrated to, or perhaps even spent their entire lives. It historically was a Viking town, notable for the herring industry, as well through its ports. It also became involved in the heavy industries as the railroad attached to Aalborg. However, today it's become more of a cultural and education capital within Denmark. So less of a focus towards commerce or industry. Her father was a typographer, typing, and her mother was a teacher. So I think her parents obviously did not come from the political class, you could call it, but I think both of those professions are intellectually curious people, but also people who are, I think, tend to be more liberal. I think if you're a typographer, you're one who's adopted a newer industry. Then obviously the Vikings did not have typographers, so it is something of a newer industry, which tends to be more of a liberal sort of temperament. Similarly, teachers, I think most of the education industry is predominantly left-leaning, especially considering any public institution is financed by the by the government, so it would make sense that they would be more left-leaning. However, this does not prove to be true in Fredriksen. She actually ends up being a little bit more right-wing than her contemporaries and probably even her parents. So I think that's an interesting note of comparison there. She studied at Aalborgas Gymnasium, so the local high school. It was a public school, however, that is focused on music and creativity, so a little bit more of an artistic school. However, it also has social sciences, which she was gravitated towards. She studied social sciences at Aalborg University, which is the best university in Aalborg, the region she was born in, so it was local. Maybe that was her decision. However, many people consider the top university in Denmark to be the University of Copenhagen, followed by Aarhus University in the second largest city, followed by the Technical University of Denmark in Lyngby. However, the university she went to is considered probably tied for number 4 with CBS, Copenhagen Business School, and I know from my experience, I have many friends who have either studied at Copenhagen Business School or have done exchanges in Copenhagen Business School. I know that that's a very, very highly ranked university and very well recognized, so her university is about on par with that amount of reputation. So nonetheless, I think it's a pretty substantial school that she went to. And also maybe she just wanted to stay local. Maybe she didn't really see a need to go off to Copenhagen Business School. So her political career started as she became a youth consultant at the LO, the Danish Confederation of Trade Unions, which is essentially an amalgamation of unions, so very, very left-leaning unions themselves tend towards socialist or left-leaning policies, and a confederation of unions is even more so in that direction. In 2001, at only 24 years old, she was elected as a member of parliament for the Copenhagen County. So that is exceptionally young. As you've seen in the previous videos, I mentioned that some individuals such as Plato advocate that no one should enter in politics before the age of 30. So becoming a member of parliament and elected official at 24 is very young. But then whether it's science or not, some people say that females mature quicker, so maybe she was more mature at this age and ready to become an elected official. But nonetheless, 24 is still very young, both historically and within Denmark as well. This was a time when she entered when the Social Democrats lost first place and moved to second for the first time since 1920. So there was a shift away from her political party. So perhaps she rose to the ranks quickly in the political party because it was starting to fail. Could have been perhaps that reason. After the election, she was named the party's spokesperson for culture, media, and gender equality. So the gender equality one makes sense. She's one of the few females who were a member of parliament at the time. However, to get a post as a spokesperson in their first term at only 24 years old, turning 25, is quite exceptional and obviously very young. In 2002, at 25 years old, she won a Nina Bang Prize for showing political courage, enthusiasm, and impact with social feeling. So obviously winning many prizes at a very young age as well. That year, she also led a panel debate on prostitution. So this is one of the main things on her political agenda. She's in favor of criminalizing the purchase of prostitutes, as we have in Canada, but not all other countries in Europe. She advocated strongly for the prohibition of purchase of sex. Similar to other countries that have a policy like that would be Iceland or Norway and Sweden. It's illegal to purchase it, same thing with Canada. But currently in Denmark, it is still legal to purchase prostitutes or sex workers. In fact, in Denmark, currently they even subsidize those with disabilities, so that if someone has a disability and they cannot be a sex worker, the government will subsidize them for that lost revenue, which I think is a little bit extreme, but also it must be taken into account. Often those sex workers are the most vulnerable in society. They often don't have many other options. So if you have a disability, perhaps that's the only option. But obviously, there's also should people with disabilities be sex workers? Is it, I don't know. I know abuse or a moral abuse. It's hard to say, but nonetheless, Fredericksen is against this. Like Canada, it's legal to sell oneself into sex as a sex worker, but it's illegal to buy it. Currently, other countries where it is completely legal are countries such as Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, the famous red light districts in Amsterdam. All of those countries, it is legal as well. So Fredericksen is hoping to push it a little bit more to some of the more countries less in favor of prostitution, or at least the purchase of prostitution. So in 2009, she made a congressional decision stating that her party, the Social Democrats, would work to put a ban on sex services. And she's been continuing this fight even till this day as well. So I think if she maintains in power, I think it's very likely that we will see this change be implemented, and it will be illegal to see the purchase of prostitutes in Denmark. But this is also a pretty recent issue, because only in 1999 was it decriminalized. So is it possible that it might shift back in the other direction? It's hard to say. The argument for the decriminalization is that it's easier to monitor and protect the sex workers if it is legal, similar to the argument posed for marijuana legalization. It's easier to perhaps tax, but we haven't really yet seen that in some of the countries where it has been legalized. So it's a difficult issue, and who knows, she might be able to affect the change she hopes, but perhaps it might even switch back soon after. So nonetheless, I think it's a very contentious issue. In 2005, she became spokesperson for social affairs after the general election, and then she became also vice chairperson of the parliamentary group of Social Democrats, so rising very quickly in her party, the Social Democrat Party. I think partly because the party had been losing a lot of shares. They'd fallen to second place for the first time since 1920. In 2010, she was it was found that her daughter and some other members in the parliament, or the Folketinget, had children in private schools, which formerly she had advocated for and even criticized people who sent their children to private schools. But she said that her stance on private schools and public schools had become more nuanced. She held that position, and she also stated that she was not willing to sacrifice her daughter's education for her political career. So I think something to note here for whether you hold it against them or for them. She has historically changed her political ideas, which I think is actually a mark of a good thinker. I was having a discussion with someone who I admire, who's a bit older than me now, but they were criticizing one of today's most prominent political leaders, who I'll mention when it comes about, and they said it's horrible how they keep switching their stance on ideas. But I thought, isn't that the mark of someone who's truly humble and open to listening to other ideas? I think it would be worse if someone never changed their ideas. So I don't think it's a sign of weakness. I think it's actually a sign of strength to be able to change one's opinions. But I guess when you're voting for someone, you kind of expect them to hold their ideas static, at least for their elected period. So there's the other side of the argument. In the 2011 general election, Prime Minister Helle Thorning-Schmidt, who was the 26th Prime Minister, and she won in a Social Democrat government, and she was appointed Minister of Employment, and she held this position from 2011 to 2014. During this time, she headed reforms of early retirement pensions, flex jobs, as well as a remodeled employment system. Her cash assistance program ultimately ended up causing lower benefits for unemployed young people, and provided cohabiting mutual support, which is considered quite controversial in Denmark at the time. But nonetheless, I think overall her job as Minister of Education or Employment was praised, hence ultimately her winning Prime Minister. Ultimately, after that, in 2014, she became Minister of Justice, and shortly after, party leader, which is interesting that she became Minister of Justice just because she does not have a legal degree or a legal background, which tends to be a sort of prerequisite to become a Minister of Justice. But I guess that just is indicative of how much people trust her and how much they support perhaps her moral alignment. In the 2015 election, the Social Democrats returned to first place after they won 3 more seats in the Folketing, which is the Danish parliament. As well, the party made a shift towards more left-wing economics, which was very prominent, especially in the left bloc of parties in Denmark at the time and till this day, hence how they won their government. But however, they also moved right in terms of their immigration policies to outdo some of the right-leaning parties. So I think that's very much how you can describe Fredericksen, as she is nuanced and her party is nuanced. She is on a more left-leaning policy. They are more left-wing in terms of economics, but they take a right-wing stance on immigration, which is maybe partially the reason why the party started to get back some more of its vote share, which had formerly been lost. In the 2019 election general, the party gained further seats in the Folketing, and the Danish People's Party and the Liberal Alliance essentially collapsed, costing Lars Løkke Rasmussen, who was the 25th Prime Minister of Denmark, to concede to defeat. Thus, she, at this point head of the Social Democratic Party, was elected in June 27th of 2019, an exclusive Social Democratic minority with support from what's called the Red Bloc, which is about an amalgamation of 4 left-leaning political parties, including those of Greenland as well. So despite their right-wing shift in terms of immigration and migration to Denmark, they garnered quite a bit of votes and support also from the left. The Queen Marquez II commissioned her at this time as well, which is because they are also a constitutional monarchy, but it is important to also note that their shift towards anti-immigration only really picked up after they got elected. So once again, if you criticize one for shifting their opinions, you might have a right to do so with this respect. But I think they did make it clear that at least her stance towards immigration was perhaps quite nuanced from common left ideologies. She reversed plans. Previously, there was a plans to hold foreigners out. However, she supported that, or foreign criminals offshore, and she was in favor of that as well. In August of 2019, one of the most, since her prime ministership hasn't been too long, one of her most notable issues was she refers to sell the autonomous Denmark territory. Denmark has its own premier. It's generally considered to be autonomous from Denmark, and she refused to sell it to the United States. Donald Trump actually canceled his visit in September, hinting on the fact that it was caused by the refusal to sell. Kim Kielsen, the premier of Greenland, said that it was not for sale, so she was obviously aligning herself with the governance of Greenland, who had also given her support through the Social Democratic Party. Which leads us to our first quote: "Greenland is not Danish. Greenland belongs to Greenland. To sell it is absurd." Which is, I think, she made the morally right decision. I think Greenland, if they wanted to, I think perhaps she would have permitted them to leave as well. So I think she was just really listening to what the people of Greenland and its leadership wanted. She has adopted a neoliberalism economic policy, as I said, a little bit more left-leaning. It's also considered laissez-faire, leave it to do, and is marked by deregulation, which is also considered a little bit, that's why it's neoliberalism. It's moving a little bit more conservative. So probably centrist, if anything, in terms of economic policy. She has this important quote that I would say sums up all of her beliefs and all of her political philosophy. For me, it is becoming increasingly clear that the price of unregulated globalization, mass immigration, and the free movement of labor is paid for by the lowest class. So this sums up almost everything on her agenda and that of the Social Democratic Party, is that the unregulated globalization, as the powers such as the European Union get stronger and exert more force on the smaller players, she feels that the people are being cost. And this is a belief that most people of Denmark do believe, hence through the democratic system she has risen to power. Also, her stance against the immigration is also clear through this quote as well. She created a law allowing Danish authorities to confiscate valuables from refugees as well. I guess part of the logic behind this, I'm not saying that I support it, in fact I'm quite against it, is that if they are bringing valuables, they could be bringing something the country doesn't want, or perhaps they might not actually be a refugee if they have a lot of money, but I don't think any of those are excellent reasons to prevent refugees from entering the country. She also put a cap on non-Western immigrants, which is clearly a sign that it's targeted towards the perhaps minorities or physical minorities within the country. I think she has no problem if people from Caucasians from the United States arrive in the country, but she has a bigger problem if others do arrive. And these policies have recently also been backed by the right-wing Danish People's Party, the DPP. So not only does she have support from the left-leaning policies called the Red Bloc, the right-wing parties are also supporting her as well. So she's garnering a lot of support. And I think that's why she was so successful. As the Social Democratic Party had been falling, she took a more right-wing stance and has brought it back into power. She has another quote here that she says, Muslims do not respect the judicial system and Muslim women are subject to massive social control. So another sign of a little bit of xenophobia here. But I think, I don't know if she is necessarily, we could call her a racist, but I think she does believe that she's helping what she considers to be the lower class through these policies. She even at one point called for the closure of some Islamic or Muslim schools. Martin Østergaard, the secretary of the Danish Social Liberal Party, which is a more left-leaning policy, as well as Christina Narbana, the president of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, have both called her or claimed that she is a xenophobe. She is afraid of or has a phobia of foreigners in the country. And that is, I think, at least made apparent or manifested in her actions and her words. Sigmar Gabriel, the former leader of the German Social Democratic Party, however, has praised her. So some more right-leaning leaders throughout the European Union actually do support her. I guess, just to sum this up, and as I said, there would be parallels between this and other videos. I think it's also important to note that Andrzej Duda, previously the leader of Poland, we saw that Poland was also moving a little bit more right as well, a little bit less in favor of immigration and less in favor of the globalization of the European Union. So this tends to be a sort of trend that is going across the whole of the continent. So I don't think she's like a standard deviation or some exception. I think she's representative of a changing sentiment in at least in Poland and Denmark or the European Union as a whole. In terms of her personal life, she was married to Eric Haar in 2003 when she was 26 years old, which is I'd say a pretty normal age for a woman, especially considering she was already a member of parliament at that point. She was already accomplished. I think that was a suitable time. However, she did have a daughter before the marriage in 2002 when she was 25, and her daughter's name is Ida Feline Haar. So, yeah, the same daughter who was found going to a private school, and she was criticized for that. They also have a son as well, Magne Hare, born in 2006. However, the couple divorced in 2014, and she's now engaged and supposedly in love with a new individual named Bo Tengberg, who's in the film industry. However, since she is so busy as prime minister, they have not yet gotten married, and they maintain as engaged. So, with the last of the quotes, I covered all of them except for this one. Social Democrats will work for a ban on the purchase of sexual services, as I mentioned before. I think is a more I don't know. I think it's a more morally aligned action. I do think that the sex workers industry is a very complex one in Europe, and obviously a lot of people will be upset if it is made illegal. But I think as a woman, I think she does, and as a mother of a daughter, I think she does have the interests of women at her heart here. So about the country, the population is 5.8 million, which is very, very small. As we'll see, is even smaller than the population of the capital of Colombia, who will the country we will be covering next. They have a GDP of 355.7 billion, which is very, very high for the population. But to put it into perspective, we now have individuals with 100 billion, so it's still not too much. Apple, the corporation, is worth over $1 trillion, so Apple is worth more, almost 3 times as much as all of Denmark. So, and the area is very small too, as well, at 42,933 kilometers square. So very small country. But I suppose if you include Greenland in that, even though it's semi-autonomous, it would be much larger. But nonetheless, the population density is quite low in Greenland. So here is the symbol of the Prime Minister of Denmark. Pardon me. Here's the symbol of the Folketinget, which is the Parliament of Denmark. Here is the flag of the region she was born in, and this is the symbol of the Social Democratic Party, of which she is the head of, and which the party that is now risen to power. So we'll discuss more about Frederik as we move into the comparison, and we will now move to Ivan Duque. So Ivan Duque is a Colombian politician. He is, like Federiksen, the youngest president in Colombian history, whereas Federiksen was the youngest prime minister in Denmark or Danish history. He's from the Democratic Center Party. And he won his first election in 2018. So their ages are also very, very close. They're only a couple years apart as well. And they were elected in 2018 and 2019, respectively. So very, very close as well in terms of time frame. And he was elected at 42 years old, which is very, very young to become a president of a country. He was backed by his mentor and ex-president Alvaro Uribe, who actually founded the party that he heads. He won his presidency on a campaign to stand against the peace treaty with the guerrilla group, the FARC. The FARC is not supported by the United Nations due to its continuous violence since 1964. However, he has been many have considered his actions towards the FARC and the movement away from peace treaties to be immoral and even against the wishes of the United Nations or the wishes of the Colombian populace as well. He's criticized for increasing the murders of these ex-guerrilla fighters that had already actually surrendered to the peace agreements. Also, he's had increasing murder of union leaders and environmentalists. He's also stopped peace with the Marxist-Leninist guerrilla group, the ELN, or the National Liberation Army. And he's also been criticized for his use of the military to squash anti-government protests in 2019. So, quite a few criticisms here, but as we'll see through his resume, he's actually done many great things as well that are perhaps less spoken about. And he has also been convicted of expulsion of UN human rights workers, so he's been removing some of the oversight that had been placed in Colombia. But in his defense, he was also formerly a UN consultant, so perhaps maybe he does know what he's talking about and might be a morally aligned individual. But nonetheless, with his early life, he was born on August 1st, 1976, so I was born on August 3rd, 1996, so he's almost exactly 20 years older than me, 20 years and 2 days. So a Leo as well. He comes from a wealthy political family from originally the Gomez Plata, which is a mountainous region in the Andes. However, he moved to Bogota, or grew up as well, in Bogota, which is the largest and capital city of Colombia. It's got the greater area has over 10 million people, so Bogota almost has twice as many people as the entirety of Denmark. So, but their GDP is actually very much quite similar. In fact, it's even smaller. So, if that tells you a little bit about what the quality of life is in these two countries, how it differs, and how in effect it'll affect their choice of leadership and governance is, I think, quite clear, but also demands a lot of consideration. His mother was named Juliana Marquez Tono. She was born in 1950, so she's still alive today, and she's a political scientist. She actually met her husband, Ivan Duque Escobar, and they married at American University in Washington, D.C., studying for an LLM. And his father, Ivan Duque Escobar, was born in 1937, which is not hugely important, but he was 13 years older than his wife, which is a pretty big age gap, and he was a pretty politically powerful individual. But nonetheless, he died in 2016, but he was a powerful local politician, the leader and governor of the Antigua region, which is the Andes region, which the Gomez Plata, where his family comes from, is also from. So he was a very powerful governor. You can call it on a provincial level. He was also, his father, Ivan Duque Escobar, was also a minister of mines and energy. He also served as head of the National Registry of Civil Status under Andre Pastrana's government. So a very powerful individual also on the federal level. And Duque also has two siblings as well, Andre and Maria Paula. So his family obviously had a lot of clout, one being a political scientist and one being a governor and also a minister as well. Obviously garnered him some paths to success that others in a relatively, or even on a non-relative scale, a quite poor country. He attended the Collegio Rochester, which is often a school associated with more privileged children. Then he went to Sergio Arboleda University in Bogota, and he graduated with a law degree in 2000 at 24 years old. I think this is important to know because it's actually not even on the list of top-rated universities in Colombia. So with his father's great political clout and privileged upbringing, I'm surprised that he ended up at a university that is not considered one of the top. But perhaps it might be something like we saw in the previous video with Shinzo Abe, where Shinzo Abe went to Seikei University, which is a very, very selective school, heavily associated and financed by the Mitsubishi Group. So maybe something similar could be said about this school. Perhaps it's very heavily politically affiliated, and it doesn't even make it on the rankings because it is so selective and so designed for the upper class and wealthy. He also, after this, he received an LLM in International Economic Law from the American University. He was also met his wife at this time, who was also studying for an LLM. The American University, once again, is not considered one of the top in the United States. However, it's located in Washington, D.C., and it's known for having a lot of politically active alumni. Also, I think it is associated in many cases with political authority in the respective countries. It's a largely international school. I think a parallel might be seen to King Duque, who is the daughter of Andrzej Duda. She also went to law school in D.C., however, at the Catholic University of America. She's similar to my age. I'd still quite like to meet her eventually. But I think there's something to be said about a lot of these politicians are sending their children, or their children are choosing to go to Washington, D.C. to attain a perspective of the United States and a global perspective in a very global city. So that's nonetheless where he went for an LLM. Then also he received MPP, a Master's in Public Policy Management from Georgetown University, which is also located in D.C. So he spent a fair amount of time in D.C. He also took executive education courses in business and government from Harvard. That's a very common thing to do these days. But once again, it should not be said that he went to Harvard. He received executive education. But what this might allude to is that he's very intellectually curious and just wants to keep learning through executive education, through international education, and that's sort of the person that he is. He began his professional career in 1999 when he was only 23 years old. Actually, before he actually even finished his law degree from Sergio Arboleda University. And after his first position was at the Andean Development Corporation, as a consultant through this. The Andean Development Corporation is a development bank, which is kind of like, you can think of the World Bank, where they finance projects to help alleviate poverty, improve the economic situation. Not like a regular bank that is more profit-driven, one that is more socially driven. He later became an advisor at the Colombia Ministry of Finance and Public Credit during Andre Pastrana's government from 1998 to 2002. This is interesting to note because his father was also serving under Andre's government as head of the National Registry of Civil Status. So both him and his father were both having quite a bit of success under this government, and probably at least his father's clout helped him in attaining this position. From 2001 to 2013, so for the bulk of his professional life, he was appointed by the then Minister of Finance and future President Juan Manuel Santos as one of Colombia's representatives in the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, which is kind of like the Andean Development Bank, but much larger, but not quite as big as the World Bank, but it's a bank that's focused on financing initiatives within the Americas to increase social welfare. He's also, during this time, during the 12 years he was there, he served as Chief of Division of Culture, Solidarity and Creativity. So I think that's also important to note because our comparison individual, Mette Fredericksen, also was a head of culture and creativity in her government. So another parallel here, there are many. He has also served as an advisor to the international advisor to the former president Alvaro Uribe Vélez during this time. So that ultimately became his very important mentor, who I think endorsed him in his own presidency and therefore very much helped him in attaining his power, but also in learning and also throughout his whole career. From 2010 to 2011, he served as a consultant at the UN and the research panel appointed by the Secretary General for the Gaza Flotilla raid in May 2010. It was a raid by Turkey on Israelis, but also individuals from other nations as well, and the United Nations needed to step in and it formed essentially a think tank to discuss the morality behind this, and Duque was selected to be part of this. Important time that this was a time when actually tensions always are quite escalated in that region, but this was a year before I went to Israel, and when I was there was a ceasefire between Palestine, a travel ban into Israel when visiting, because there were a lot of fights and going on between Gaza and the Israel, missiles flying back and forth. But I think that's a very contentious issue, but I'll discuss that more when we get to perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu, perhaps of Israel. But yeah, nonetheless, he was selected because he was considered, I think, both morally aligned through his work through international development banks, but also being Colombian, an independent perspective. So in 2014, after his 12-year stint at the International Development Bank, or American Development Bank, he returned to Colombia as a Senate candidate in the 2014 legislative elections for the Partido Centro Democrático. So this, or the Democratic Center Party. This is a spin-off and now ruling party after Juan Manuel Santos opened peace talks with the FARC, the guerrilla group. So what happened was Duque's mentor, Alvaro Uribe Vélez, and who was also a former right-wing president from the Amalgamated Party, spun off the Democratic Center Party against Juan Manuel Santos in a group that advocated for ending the peace talks with the FARC. And obviously Duque, being the mentee of Uribe, joined in this new spin-off party. The way Uribe designed the party, he handpicked all of the candidates in both the upper and the lower house. So I guess one could consider this a little bit less democratic. So if an individual were trying to vote for them, they could only vote for the whole party, the whole Democratic Center Party. Whereas other parties, they would allow them to vote for the individual. So a little bit less democratic. It's like an all or nothing, and gave a lot more power to the party itself. And nonetheless, Duque was on this secret list that Uribe, his mentor, formed for the party. So they won, and he became senator. And during this time, he created 4 major laws that I will mention here. The first in 2016 was called Law 1809, that allowed for advanced severance payments for it to be used as education insurance. So that's like if someone's about to lose their job and they get a severance package, it's a form of insurance. They were allowed to transfer that insurance towards their children's education. So this is essentially a policy that's dedicated to getting more students into university education, which is something that he was fortunate to have, and I think he believes that being an avid learner himself, he believes that the people of Colombia should share. In addition, in 2017, he made the law called Law 1822 that permitted maternity leave to grow from 14 to 18 weeks, and it also extended this to adopted families. So he saw that maternity leave was a difficulty for women to advance in their career, so we expanded this period. I think that is something that Frederickson would agree with. I think the maternity leave could be extended. What is the exact right time? It's hard to say, but it's definitely evident that this is a more left-leaning policy and something that is with the people at heart. Additionally, his third major law in 2017 was called Law 1831, that increased the availability of defibrillators in public facilities and high public traffic areas. So an interesting point is that in Colombia, the highest cause of death, supposedly, is heart attacks. So he allowed defibrillators to be put in high traffic areas and public areas, and essentially to try to just decrease the highest cause of death, which is I guess a bottleneck approach. Is this true? Maybe it might actually, the highest cause could be through violence or unmeasured violence. It's hard to say, but either way, I think it's good policy addressing the biggest issue. In 2017, his last major law, Law 1834, called the Orange Law. He also has a book called The Orange Laws, where he advocates for promotion, development, and protection of creative and cultural industries. And I think this is something that is important to him. He was head of the IDB, of the creativity in the International Development Bank, and he also wrote a book called actually The Orange Effect, where he advocates for protecting cultural heritage, which is something that we also saw parallel with in Frederickson. In December of 2017, he was appointed candidate for the party as president. He was backed by his Uribe, his mentor, and he won in the primaries within his own party, because the system is actually much more like the United States system, as they have a president and they have primaries, and yes, very much similar, and they have a Senate as well. It's very similar to the United States system. So nonetheless, in the primaries, he won with 4 million votes against the second place with 1.5 million votes, and the third place with 385,000 votes. So over twice as much as the second place candidate and over 4 times as much as the third place candidate. So quite successful in the primaries. In the actual presidential elections, which after he won the presidential nomination, he received 39% in the first round, and in the second round, he achieved 54%, with the second place candidate, Gustavo Petro, achieving 42%. So he won in the second round, and today he is now the president of Colombia. It's interesting to note that after the primaries ended, he said that his running mate, Marta Lucia Ramirez, would be his running mate. So he's, I guess, one of the reasons he did so well in the primaries was that he connected well with his the people who were running against him within his own party. So in terms of his political policies, he's supports Venezuelan refugees, and he's an advocate in the UN for education, poverty alleviation for these individuals, and he criticizes many other South American countries who have not contributed enough to this the Venezuelan refugee crisis. In fact, 0.5% of the spending, which accounts for 20% of the shortfall in the budget, so in more simple terms, if he were not to spend this 0.5% of the budget, the deficit would not have grown by 20%. So obviously he's spending a lot and dedicating a lot towards this immigration crisis, which leads to a comparison with Frederickson, because Frederickson is very much against the the refugee crisis compared to her contemporaries, and has been compared to a xenophobe. Here's our first quote here. For those who want to make xenophobia a political path, we adopt the path of brotherhood. For those who want to outcast or discriminate against migrants, we stand up today to say that we are going to take them in and we are going to support them during difficult times. So I would say almost completely the opposite of Frederickson's arguments towards migration. Additionally, in 2019, during the Colombian protests, he against his government, mostly for his actions against the FARC as well as the ELN, particularly stepping out of the peace talks. There were huge protests in Bogota, and he caused the military to intervene and suppress them, and there were deaths and murders committed, which he is heavily criticized for. He is a Catholic individual, and as mentioned, he is married to Maria Juliana Ruiz Sandoval, and he has 3 children with her. He met her at the American University in D.C., so she also has a nice international education. And they married in 2003 at 27 years old, the exact same year that Fredericksen also got married. He has, when he was a young boy, he was part of a grunge band called Pig Nose in high school, where he was the lead singer. And he's very much changed from this period of time, but I think that's also indicative that he has always been a bit of a leader. He wasn't the drummer in the band, he wasn't the guitarist, he was the lead singer, which I think is, there's something about a leadership quality, I think, in a singer. And all musicians as well, but particularly a singer in a band, I think, is one who has maybe the largest aspirations, one could say. Not always, but I think that's just the type of person he is. He wants to be the leader. He has written many books, like Fredericksen. I'll move into the comparison now, but firstly I'll go into the images. Here is the seal of the President of Colombia. Here is the symbol of Antioquia, which is the province that his father was the governor of, and his family marks from their heritage. Here's the symbol of the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, which he spent 12 years for, and was at one point the chief of the creativity and culture. Here's the symbol for the Centro Democratico Party, which is the spin-off created by his mentor, Uribe. And here's the symbol of his university, the American University in Washington, D.C. So for the last 2 quotes, we won't allow the borders to become a sanctuary for the ELN. It doesn't surprise me. So although he's allowing refugees to come in from Venezuela, with his political opponents, he feels like he can send his military to intervene across borders. So I think very, very helpful to those in need, and very hard on those who cause violence. The head-on fight against drug trafficking is multinational, a coordinated and shared responsibility among all countries. So he has contributed the country to addressing historically Colombia has had quite a bit of issues in being involved in drug trafficking, and that is something they want to address. But also he understands that he needs to work with other countries, and other countries need to help him and his country as well. So something that he wants to address. Population, as I mentioned before, is much larger than Denmark. Denmark has a population of 5.8 million. Colombia has a population of 49.65 million, so almost 10 times the population. The capital of Bogota has 10 million by itself. Capital of Colombia almost has twice as many people as all of Denmark. But in terms of GDP, which might mark their actual share in the global economy, their GDP is 331 billion, which is smaller than that of Denmark. And 4 billionaires combined, 4 of the top billionaires combined, would be almost just as large as Colombia as a whole. And the area is much larger than Denmark, at 1.142 million kilometers squared, whereas Denmark was only 42,933. So much larger. In terms of the symbols, as usual, the flag is here. Here's the flag of Colombia. Here's I already went through all these. So into the comparison. So Fredericksen and Duque are both, I think the main thing is that they were born just 1 year apart, and they achieved their leadership role 1 year apart. They got married at the same time, at the same year as well. However, one got divorced. They both have children, very similar. However, their stances, I think, are very much quite different. So historically, Colombia has a history of authoritarian governments and a lot of right-wing and nationalist policies, whereas Denmark has a history of being very, very left-leaning. However, both of these individuals, I think, differ from that of their nation, as their nation's history, whereas Fredriksen has moved more to the right compared to her former the former leaders. She has taken a more right-wing stance on immigration, whereas Duque has taken a more left-leaning stance on immigration. One is considered a xenophobe, the other is very much against xenophobia. So very, very different in terms of these respects. Similarly, Fredriksen is very much, I think you could consider her more of a nationalist. She was educated in Denmark. She spent all of her political career in Denmark, whereas Duque is a bit more of an internationalist in that he was educated in D.C., spent a lot of time in D.C. He spent time at Inter-American Development Bank with the United Nations, so he's much more towards globalization, whereas Fredriksen actually states that globalization has been one of the causes or the leading drawbacks in the Danish economy. So very, very different policies, but I think the similarity could be seen in that although their policies almost directly contradict each other, they're both similar in that they have diverged from their nation's history and sort of past political path, whereas one has marked a shift from towards left policies to those more right, whereas one has marked a shift from right policies to some that are more left. So I think a very, very interesting comparison between those two individuals. So without further ado, thank you so much for watching this video on Mette Fredriksen and Ivan Duque. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a bit about both of these two really great leaders and really fascinating countries as well. So thank you so much.